think we can get started with showing a video and making sure the pieces of 147 get back to the jury. But let's at least have the discussion, because it would be the second half of the discussion. Mr. Harvey started with a no and then expanded on the no as to why he felt it would be inappropriate to permit the jurors to continue to examine evidence in this case. So if you'd like to expand on that, but we're going to take a quick time out.
Sure.
Two things. When Ms. Nelson gets back down here,
I just spoke to her.
okay, so she's working the phones to see what's going on.
She is.
Great. Second thing, I just want to make sure that while you're here, you know, this is that kind of day. As folks come in for presiding matters, if you, Kathy will manage it, but you'll be the point of contact.
I got you.
Great. Okay, Mr. Harvey, I'm sorry.
I haven't pivoted from the original position I explained to the court yesterday, but I want to put it in some context first. First, a jury view in Georgia is not evidence. It's not evidence. We talked a little bit about the difference between an evidentiary view and just a scene view. That's the view, but a jury view is not evidence, and for that proposition I refer you to Crow versus the state at 265 Georgia 582, citing Forney versus the state at 255 Georgia 316. Secondly, the car is not an evidence. The car has never been moved into evidence. It is not into evidence, is not in evidence. It cannot be moved in evidence now. And therefore, experiments, any use of that vehicle at this point in regard to the fact that it is not in evidence. And there are a number of cases where parties have moved, for example, scenes into evidence. Cars that couldn't be brought into the courtroom were moved into evidence. Houses were moved into evidence. This car has not. The court approved a jury view. We did a jury view, but the car is not in evidence. And therefore, all the cases that talk about, well, the jury can, look at evidence and they can maneuver evidence and they can maneuver pieces of evidence are just inapplicable. Third, and in that regard, if you look at Barron versus the United States, case out of the D.C. Court of Appeals, and specifically where the car wasn't moved into evidence, and the court went through a discussion about the nature of whether a jury view is evidence or not, and the difference in jurisdiction. But the car isn't in evidence. That case was reversed because the court allowed the jury to do a jury view and look at the car when the car was not in evidence. So I guess those are my seriatim positions.
Just one more.
Yes, there are several. I know that we had some discussion, and we all went down, Mr. Walker and the state's team included, to make sure that the seats were in the same position. And we would have to do that again, of course. I do want to say that each expert in every photograph that was used by the experts in the case, when they were determining the position of the weapon, was not the short dowel that was used when they did the jury view, but was a longer dowel that went over the seat. So if all we're going to do is relook at a non-piece of evidence with a piece of evidence without the same dowel in the same kind of location that was the dowel used by the experts along the dowel, I think it gives a different perspective, finally, or a perspective that we would need to be able to reopen and re-argue if it was with the short dowel. And finally, the jurors, of course, are different heights, different weights, different body styles, which would make a significant difference in their view of how the gun could be, or what position the gun might be in, if they were to do that kind of reenactment. So I guess it's a 4 or 5-fold position.
Multi-pronged.
Multi-pronged, right. Pivot. Multi-pronged pivot.
Mr. Wakeford?
Good morning, Your Honor.
Good morning.
The state has previously given the defense, just a few moments ago, given the defense and the court the state's outlook on this matter. Essentially boiled down, first of all, the jury has already been allowed to get in the car. The jury has been allowed to handle the gun. The jury's simply asking to put two pieces of evidence together that were the car physically capable of fitting in a jury room, this question wouldn't even be before the court. The comparison I kept coming back to last night was if this case was about whether a cell phone could fit in a paper cup, the jury would be back there trying to put the cell phone inside the paper cup. Unfortunately, we have an automobile, so that's not possible. So this is simply a different version of that scenario. But and the authority we've provided states that the real issue that impacts the substantial rights of defendants is when jurors bring in extraneous information or materials to conduct experiments that are outside the purview of the evidence in the case.
A ruler to measure the sawed-off shot.
Or a material, or going to the scene without authorization, trying to time how long it takes to get between 2 points, then using that information in deliberations.
Sure. Or in this case, it would be during a lunch break, getting into one of their own cars that's kind of like a Ford excursion with gun they might have, or a toy gun, and saying, well, how does this work? That would be a problem.
That would be something we would have to discuss. Even then, I will say, just because I did research and I won't brag about it, even then, Your Honor, in order for there to be a real problem, there has to be a substantial impact on the rights of the defendant. There has to be actual prejudice shown on deliberations, but that's always viewed after the fact. In this case, we're talking about it beforehand. This is evidence that has already been presented to the jury. They've already been allowed to evaluate the car and the gun. They're simply trying to put them together. There's language in the state's brief which states that the use of an object by the jury may constitute no more than a common sense illustration of the evidence admitted at trial. This whole case has become about the differing versions of events put forward by the state and the defendant. The jury has a duty to evaluate competing versions of the truth. What they have done is they've gone back into deliberations. They've said, we've heard this story and we've heard this story. We've got the gun here. What are we doing? We can answer this question. Or at least we can shed more light on this question. That's all they're trying to do. And they're not trying to do it with something unauthorized or something that hasn't been strenuously argued before this court beforehand. It's the actual gun and the actual vehicle. Finally, other states have allowed examinations like this, as always, trying to shed light on the truth of the events. And if we want to get into the matters, if Your Honor wants to get into the matters of evidentiary view versus scene view, this is an evidentiary view. Evidentiary views are defined as situations where juries are allowed to go examine evidence that, for sheer practicality, can't be taken into the jury room. It was defined around automobile cases.
Do you have a concern, or at least what's your response to one of the prongs of Mr. Harvey's argument that the case law may indeed say what you're describing, and that involves jurors taking piece of evidence A, piece of evidence B, maybe even piece of evidence C, and manipulating them, and that's okay. I think that is what the case law says, as long as they're not bringing stuff from the outside, super glue to glue it together or something. But the car, is not evidence. And so we have piece of evidence A, the firearm, in his car. What's your response to that concern?
Georgia has never examined the incredibly finite point of something which has been allowed an evidentiary view for the jury. Is that an actual piece of evidence? Does that have to be tendered? That's never been examined. The state's position is the jury's been allowed to do this, and the evidentiary view takes into account that the reason this is called an evidentiary view is because it can't go back to the jury for practical reasons. However, it's within the court's discretion, and there's ample Georgia authority on this point, if it needs to be in evidence in order to satisfy the concerns of the defendant, the court, even during deliberations, can reopen evidence to allow the jury to make that examination. The defendant should be allowed to be present with counsel, everybody's there.
We would do it like we did last time.
Exactly. And if that is the concern, then there is ample authority giving this court the discretion to, I'm using air quotes, reopen the evidence in order to actually place this into evidence and satisfy the concern that, taking a piece of evidence A and a piece of evidence B is not our situation, that this is somehow extraneous. But given that the jurors have already been allowed to do this, we think that that is a distinction without difference in this situation. But the court does have the discretion to do so.
Do you know, or do one of your colleagues know if, I should have asked this up front, can we even do this today? Can the vehicle be here? As the sheriff said, we will once again devote the person power to getting people down into the Sally Port area.
There's a lot of nods at this table, Your Honor.
All right.
Yes.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Mr. Harvey, anything you want to say for the record in conclusion? To buttress your multiple prongs.
Well, yes, but it doesn't sound much like deliberations to me when everybody's there watching the jury do what they do. That's not deliberations. One, that was it. It's the state's obligation to put into evidence whatever it is that they want to be put into, they want in evidence. They did not put the vehicle in evidence into have a piece of evidence be manipulated by jurors in a non-piece of evidence that they have already seen and have everybody present during these, quote, deliberations, I think is improper. And in the case I cited to you, it was the back seat of a vehicle that was an issue in the case. The vehicle wasn't in evidence, and the judge allowed the jury to go into the back seat of the vehicle. Jury's already been in the back seat of the vehicle. The jury's going to go back into the back seat of the vehicle, which isn't in evidence, with a piece of evidence, manipulated in some fashion. Then, if you're going to allow that, which I don't think you should at this point, then we should be able to reopen, to re-argue that issue, because we did not argue that issue with the jurors with the gun inside the vehicle with, again, a dowel that was smaller than both the experts.
Smaller meaning it projects backward from the rear of the front passenger seat, less the one that they saw when they did the jury view projects backwards less from the rear of the front passenger seat than the ones in your experts' photos or the state's experts' photos.
In both experts' photos. Right. I'd be glad to show you.
I don't disagree.
Okay. Because we saw the PowerPoints.
Repeatedly.
Yes. So I just don't think we can get beyond it's not evidence.
Okay. As both sides know, I'm not a big fan of putting unnecessary obstacles in the way of the jurors' pursuit of the facts and what they think is the right outcome during the course of their deliberations. I don't know that it's necessary for the vehicle to be in evidence, but I'm going to err on the side of caution, and I will reopen the evidence, which is within my discretion and authority, for the purposes of admitting what I'm going to call States 499. I don't think there's a States 499 according to my list of exhibits. That will be the Ford excursion. I find that there has been ample whole chain of custody laid to establish that Ford Excursion with the Longhorn front license plate and the burgundy seats that the jurors saw during their jury view is in fact the Ford Excursion that the jurors have seen so many pictures of and heard so many descriptions of. But there have been several witnesses who have described the toing and froing of that excursion and where it ended up, why it ended up, where it ended up. So 499 is now in evidence. That's the Ford Excursion. I will allow the jurors to take the firearm down there. What we need to work through is a point Mr. Harvey made in his final comments that I hadn't thought about. We are in a different phase now. It's deliberations. And while we will all be here when they watch the video, and so I was defaulting to that format, it may well be that the jurors want to discuss what they're doing with those two pieces of evidence. And so it may not make sense to have the state, Mr. McIver, his lawyers, and me around. It may make sense to have a deputy around who can ensure that, I don't think they can move the seats because the battery's dead, but maybe there shouldn't even be a deputy within earshot. There has to be someone down there because it's the sheriff's salary board. And so I'd like input from both sides, given the development that I'm going to allow this to occur over the objection of the defense, how it should occur. And it seems to me all 12 have to be down there. You wouldn't have one at a time because then they're deliberating on their own. It shouldn't be a subset of the 12, all 12. And then maybe we shouldn't be down there. You all would go down there first to make sure that it is in fact the same vehicle and the seat hasn't been pushed up into the dashboard or the engine isn't running. But then maybe once both sides have said it is as it was when they saw it before, we're now going to get out of the way and let the jurors do that. State's perspective on that.
First, for the record, the state would so move the vehicle into evidence.
Okay.
State's 499. And I just want to correct the record for expedition.
Sorry.
For expedition.
Expedition.
Right. And
talking about a completely different vehicle. Expedition.
And also, Judge, given Mr. Harvey's comments, I do believe we are at a different phase right now. And logistically speaking, the vehicle will be here at about 9:30. Mr. Traffic will be here at 9:30. I think it makes sense for us procedurally just to do like we did before, make sure that the vehicle is set up in the manner in which it was when Mr. Traffic saw it. We can reinsert the dial. I think the vehicle should be placed in the same position that it was in when we did the jury view. I think that's a good location for it. And I think it will allow a sheriff's deputy to perhaps stand off, you know, like perhaps where the reporters were or something.
Minus the reporters.
Minus the reporters. Just to ensure some security and some safety concerns and allow them to go down and do whatever it is that they want to do and also discuss. I think that would be appropriate. And so, logistically, I think all of that can be worked out in short order.
Okay. Mr. Harvey, the Ford Expedition, the jurors.
The King Ranch, the King Ranch.
King Ranch. I did see the emblem on the side that said that. Further cementing the chain of custody. Lawyers, client present for this or not?
Let me just, and as the state did get a couple of things on the record, of course I'm going to object to you reopening the evidence and allowing the King Ranch in evidence, because that you were just doing the work that the state failed to do. So I object to that. Even if they had moved and you had allowed it, that didn't happen, but I object to you doing their work for them and moving the vehicle in. Secondly, you know, we still have the issue with the dowel. Everybody's expert testified with regard to a long dowel. There were also tape measures in those pictures. There was evidence about how far back it was based upon the GSR pattern? Are we going to give them a tape measure? I mean, this presents all sorts of problems. So I think, and secondly, remember, originally there was a wine bottle in the back of the pocket of the back seat, which does inform where your legs can be. We've already let them in without the wine bottle, but now we have the wine, the car with the gun. So I think we're doing if we're doing a reenactment, we're doing a reenactment with an improper dowel without the wine bottle, which impacts where people's legs can and cannot be. With regard to the presence, I think if we're going to do this, I think the defendant has a right to be there, and we would request that we be there.
Okay.
One thing you're up. But never mind, I'm going to sit down.
Okay. They won't have a measuring tape. You will have an opportunity, defense and state, to do your own measurements if you want before you say, yes, this looks like it was in essentially the same position. I don't get the sense that it has moved. The inside of the vehicle has changed at all from when the jurors last saw it, so we have that consistency built in. I appreciate there were some smidge concerns about how it was set up, but if it hasn't been adjusted since then, we are partially addressing that. The dowel is not evidence, and there can be no dowel in there. Of course, when Mr. McIver was sitting in the back seat, there wasn't a dowel there. So if the dowel is a source of concern, another approach would be to have no dowel. I leave it up to the two sides to decide whether they want the dowel in there. That's not in evidence. What's in evidence? Give me a little time to think about who all will be down there with the jurors. And once we've worked through those things, we can let the jurors know that it is available, and they can say, great, we want to go now, we'll go during our lunch break. Right? Although I'm guessing the sheriff would prefer, if it's down there, that we say, no, if you're going to do it, we do it now. But I'll talk with some deputies about it.
Sure.
Okay.
Sure. Also, we've got the transcripts back as well.
For the...
Back it.
Okay. All right. Anything else from the defense?
No.
Okay. Let's bring the jurors in, please. Tell me about it. Deputy Murphy, we're trying to get you some support because you can only be in one place at one time.
Exactly.
What's the word on Mr. Scott?
He is here. I brought him up.
So he's up?
Yes.
Great. Let's see what's going on with our friends behind that door.
Door number one. Door number one, door number two.
Always pick one.
Always pick one.
They're ready, Judge.
To watch the video?
Yes.
Okay, if you could get your client back out here, please. And is 390 still queued up? Great.
All jurors are present and accounted for, Judge.
Thank you. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen.
Please be seated.
Welcome back. So I'm curious if, now that you're the veterans in the courthouse, when you see sort of fresh new jurors with their little stickers in the cafeteria looking nervous, it's sort of like being almost a graduating senior on campus, and sort of pat them on, it'll be okay, trust me, it's not going to be anything like what we've been through. I got to greet the jurors yesterday, the new incoming jurors who might have been assigned to a trial yesterday, and I told them that while it might seem like it's a burden to be here more than just yesterday, I have some new friends who've been here for a whole bunch of weeks, so they were going to make it, the jurors yesterday. We are going to, at your request, play States 390, which is the interview between the Atlanta police detectives and Mr. McIver and Mr. Maples and that other attorney. We're going to press play in just a moment. When we're done with that presentation, I have for you the parts of 147, that are available for you during your deliberations. So I'll hand it to one of you. You can have that. And you will be able to, if you still want to, see the vehicle again and have the firearm there. We're working on the logistics of that, but that is something that can happen, assuming it's still something you all want to have happen. And we'll take care of it at some point this morning. We may need to interrupt you. I appreciated you all saying we're in the middle of something and we can wait. That's exactly right, we can. But the vehicle being down in that area, it needs to not be there as soon as it can not be there. And so that's one where I actually will say, no, you got to stop what you're doing, and it's time to go down there. You all have to be there if you're going to do this, because it is part of your deliberation. So it's not, well, 3 of us want to do this. It's everybody or nobody. So just be thinking about that, because I'll be checking in with you once I know everything's positioned down below. And if that's the will of the group, then we'll make it happen. Okay? Is someone in a position to start the video? Oh, you need to hand the transcripts out. We've got the very same transcripts that you had before to use should you choose to follow along. The evidence is the video and what is said or not said or done or not done in the video. The transcript is merely an aid if it aids you. You all should be easy on Deputy Murphy today if he's a little slow on responding. We've got about 9 other things going on since you guys are deliberating, and he's being pulled in about 10 different directions. But we prioritize that blue light when we finally notice it's on and try to get him back there. All right, everyone have a transcript? Anyone not have a transcript? All right, stay in your hands. I will dim the lights. Before you play it anymore, you may want some volume on it. Maybe there will be volume. But I want to remind you all that it may appear choppy because through rulings I made, there were parts that were deemed not to be relevant to what you all need to work through as jurors in this case. So again, if it suddenly jumps from someone like this and then the person sitting down, that's solely because I directed the state to remove certain parts of it where people are talking about things that we don't have to deal with what you all are working through. All right, how are we doing with audio?
It's ready, and I played it this morning. It was nice and loud. Can the court just make sure that the courtroom's volume is all the way up?
So I'll push all these other switches. All I did, this one switch makes the lights go. Everything else is like the transporter and Scotty, and I see who leaves the courtroom when I pull the switch.
He knows that there were large homeless people down like this. He said, he didn't play with the hammer, and he didn't put it back full out. He knew where it was. He couldn't even know the Kansas or Texas car. And so he knows how they're on Piedmont to go down and they turn on one side and they go, and that turns into either line. That turns into on the right. Yeah. That's just and Mr. Smith, the judge had it downstairs. Did you want some water here? You should have it. Sure. Okay. All right. If you want any, they'll take my son out. Okay. So, obviously, you know, this is kind of what we talked about the events that happened over this past weekend. I know some of it's probably going to be difficult for you to answer, but take your time. We're not rush here, but we're not here to assume one another. We're just trying to basically get a timeline of the events that happened and just tell me whatever you can remember. I don't expect you to tell me something that you don't know. And that's all we're trying to think about here. Because I just kind of wanted to start that. From what I understand, you guys were, everybody was at you guys, I guess you got a horse farm or a horse ranch down in Putnam County? Okay, yeah, I looked at it online, it was quite nice. So how many horses do you have down there? 9? Okay. You guys go down there fairly often? Kind of get away from the city place? Okay. Do you know, what day did you guys get down there? Who was there? You remember?
We got down on Friday, and Daniel Kurt was our guest.
Okay. You guys go down in one vehicle?
Yes.
Okay, that was the expedition? Okay. Did you guys take turns driving down there, or did somebody drive on one of those? Okay. Okay. It was a van, to drive on down? Yeah. But that's it? The same way, I think, that was the drive, so. So you guys got down there Friday? You guys do find some horses and,
Oh, no, we got down about 8 o'clock, had dinner at a local restaurant.
okay.
Came in much later.
Okay. And then that was Friday, right?
Correct.
And then, what happened? What did you guys do on Saturday?
Errands in the morning.
Okay.
I went to the co-op, picked up cattle feed, things like that.
Okay.
We ended up buying some food and cooked it.
Okay. And then on Sunday, so Sunday, what was Sunday like? Now you guys get out, we're trying to figure out what happened, what you guys might have done that day, and what time you left.
Our manager of our place comes at 9 o'clock. An hour and a half, and he goes to church and takes the day off. And I get up early routinely on Sunday to make coffee and get ready for books. Had some sausage biscuits. And he came at 9. He and I fed the pianos. And I got up with Andrew about 10. He had breakfast. He left at 10:30 to go to church.
I didn't get out Sunday.
It's kind of a crash day. Laid around, watched some football weekend stuff. Left at noon to the Law&Crime plantation. And left at noon. Went over, had a snack, did some balls, and then had a tea time at 2 o'clock. And golf's about 4 hours, 4.5. Right. So
For me, it's about 6.
that's bad, I would. After I golfed, we went back to the ranch to pick up Daniel Joe's. Actually, had been riding horses in the afternoon. We left there, and we met Diane's vice president, so it was a fellow named Craig Stranger. He lives in Commerce, and we met him at a local one for dinner. They talked business, and we all had a meeting.
You know, but you guys have anything to drink, or what were you eating?
Diane ordered a bottle of wine, and red wine. She was red wine, and the wines. And Mr. Stringer and Dan Joe don't drink. They're red wine free. So she poured me a glass, and poured us a glass. And dinner came, and we
And then, when you had to come home from there, how do you normally travel to get up to your guys' place?
What's it on the I-20 up the way and get on the connector and get off 400.
Okay.
We have a condo lease there that we can start next to Lennox Mall.
Okay. So it's the easiest route for you, just get out and run that bitch.
It's a bit of a trek.
Right. How long does that normally take? You know?
From the ranch to the,
Yeah, from the ranch just without a stop here, how long does it normally take?
an hour and 40.
Okay.
It's about 100 miles.
Okay.
From Congress is
That ride from Congress over to the connector, we got to have conversations in the car, talking about anything, or we never?
I was just looking for
Okay.
It's been a long day for my guy. My golf swing is so bad. It takes a lot of energy to get around. And there's a couple that spend a lot of time with it.
It happens.
I get off the golf course, I'm really tired.
I get to, I don't know, takes it, especially in the heat, takes it out. So, what's the next thing that you can remember after you left Congress and got in the vehicle? So, Daniel was driving, right? Okay.
I was in the backseat.
In the backseat, okay. And what's the next thing that you can, I know you said you kind of fell asleep there, what's the next thing that you can remember from there?
I was tired. I don't sleep well in the car, so it's kind of a twilight zone for me. I remember the turn going from I-20 onto the connector. It's a pretty hard right turn. Guaranteed to wake me up. And the next thing I remember is we're going down. And the connector doesn't go down. We've been on a lot, but we were going down. And just wondering what that was. And then a turn was made. And I knew then that we were no longer on the connector.
Right.
And I came up and I said, girls, what are we and what's happening here?
Right.
We were clear on our path.
Right.
And that's fine. Struck away.
Okay. And what do you remember after that? Happening next?
We went through an area, I could describe my familiarity with it, but we went through an area I thought it was particularly dangerous. At night, I'd seen police vehicles there. It's a route I take from my office to her office.
Okay.
And I see police vehicles there with the lights on, and they're doing things with people that are there. And
Remember any landmarks or anything?
I think it was underpass.
Okay.
As best I can know, very dark. My office to her office. And I see police vehicles there with the lights on, and they're doing things with people that are there. And
Remember any landmarks or anything?
I think it was underpass. As best I can know, very dark, but it seemed to me it was. And that's one that has a particularly high population of homeless people, at least in the daytime. But at night, there were a lot of people there. And I quickly said, this is a big mistake. We're in a place that we don't belong. And of course, here we are in a almost new SUV and two women in the front seat. So anyway, they made a couple turns and things were not going well. I said, we'll be on Piedmont shortly. And I said, if you don't mind, please hand me my gun. It was in the center council. We had some break-ins in our office where the only thing they're looking for seems to be a gun. And so in response to that, I had wrapped my gun in a Publix grocery sack. So if you open the console, you have no clue what you're looking at, other than flashlights and stuff like that. So the guy reaches in, pulls it out, hands it back to me, and by then we may have been on Piedmont. Anyway, I was relatively satisfied that we were out of that kind of area. And I guess I just laid back again and went to sleep. This trial was on kind of had an equipment and and then I remember next happening. Joe came to a stop, and anyway, just time to wake up. But she came to a stop, and I was handling the gun. Did not realize it was in my lap, but it went off. When Jamie was looking for, or when she was making these turns, was she following GPS? Was she listening to anything, or just from her? No, Diane's office is very near there. Diane was director. Right left. So she knew where she went, basically. My dismay was, it seemed like every turn we made, the street was darker and there were more people milling about. I mean, it was kind of being rose the hair on the back of your neck. You were down near the Peachtree Cross shelter in that area there? I'm not sure what I think is like there. The ramp would be going down. It skirts around grade somewhere. Oh, yeah. So anyway. You got to go back under the damn truck connector. You know that like that tunnel type there, it's dark under there. Because we only always have. Yeah, if you come out, it's like a drum on the Edgewood station that everybody trolley or whatever the big red off thing. The streetcar, yeah, their garage is right there on Bell Street and Holler and all that stuff is down around there. I was kind of got my head up club and could look out. Right. It was a scene that you didn't want to see. That's the only place I think I was in that river fast on. Keep going all the way up to the rest of the top open. Right, and I guess if you went underneath there, and then you made your way over to people, there were a couple turns in there before. Yeah, you got to have a high speed car. Anyway, I was fussing, right? And she said, we're almost late. Right, settle down, settle for lunch. It's pretty much a straight shot north from there. On Piedmont? Yeah. I mean, I know you know why, and just, if you don't know, I mean, I need to give speaking out, you know why she got off Edgewood. No, he doesn't know where she got off. Right, that's what we're talking about. Yeah, you were going down. Right, that's what I know you were going down. Again, but you don't know why you were right in this. And Diane's kind of a role person, and she said, go down here and we'll take Surface Street home. Did she travel Surface Street still work? That you know off and on, depending on the highway traffic? No, but that's her neighborhood. Okay. Her office is that big smokestack, 225 Forty Center. Yeah, but it's smokestack that sticks on the highway? Oh, yeah. Oh, she's right there by the American Hospital there, sort of her neighborhood. I guess she fell out. Right. Went through there. But I could tell she hadn't been through there that hour. Right. Okay, so, what do you remember after the gun was on? I was there, I immediately called out. I said, is everybody all right? And Danny Joe said yes. Diane, it was kind of silent. She said, I've been shot, words to that effect. And I immediately put my arms around her and tried to determine how bad it was. And then I made the judgment that Emory was the justice hospital. They're high on our firm, very good bit. So we shot down Piedmont, crossed over on the road, hit Morning side, and went into the Danny Joe driving with me. The gun is yours? Yes. How long have you had that? Well, since I got the car, we should have about 13 to 15 months. Did you buy it at a sporting store? Yeah, sure, I can tell you all that. Do you know what it was? It's called Baines, B-A-Y-N-E-S, Army Navy. It was Milledgeville, Georgia. It's a gun store that's there, a lot of sports. Okay. I ordered that from them. Okay. How long did you shoot it? I didn't discharge that gun in a couple of years. I don't worry about it at all. Right. You ever taken any, safety classes or anything like that? No, nothing. And it's serving Vietnam life. You know, that makes us smart. In the Air Force, we sent the officers out there to fight the war. That's not a branch of the military. It's like a camp. That's like a big camp. We have better officers. Yeah, I mean, it's better. It's slept better. I think he's just joking. Yes, that's true. I went to hospital somebody had that. Never forget as long as I live. As we pulled up to watch the door of the ER, and was search for the thing, I got out and yelled gunshot wounds. Anyway, people were scurrying around and a gurney comes out and I helped load Diane. In fact, like she wasn't very responsive. And they rolled around, and of course I'm holding her hand over there and we go into the room. Maybe 30 rooms as big as this, and it is absolutely filled with people. I can't tell you how impressed it was. I mean, maybe 15 people. And staff was, they got all blue of stuff. And I'm still holding her hand, and people are doing everything like you see on TV. And finally, this doctor turns to me, and he's got the long coat, which tells you a doctor versus an intern. He turned and said, "We don't have room for you anymore." And I knew then I was so struck at their efforts. And I moved outside as quick as I could and just watched for the last the car, DJ's still in the car gets validated, so obviously it's just, Danny Joe grabbed her purse and Diane's purse, which I guess that's mine, and just ran off, and I guess the valet, I wasn't there. And then we ended up with the car at the end of the night, or the middle of the night, whatever. But I left my phone, I left everything. Danny Joe went back outside to get my phone, so I could, again, his gun was still in the car. Oh, yeah, I mean, I dropped it immediately and went right to my hand. Oh, yes, sir. Did you get a chance to talk to the doctor at all? Anything you didn't know? Yes, there was, they brought us into the family room at the ER, and it was a female doctor with a name tag, and the whole thing was a blur. I think it was 40 or 40 or something, a female. And she said, your wife's in bad shape, but she's responsive, and we've been lucky enough to get 2 surgeons from Grady to come over, I guess a stroke of luck. And they're going to move her up to the OR, and they're going to have to go in. And at that time, we asked her, how is she, and so on. Has she said anything? And this doctor, she said it was an accident, and there was some noise. We asked her to repeat herself, just hoping she'd say something else. She said, you're in good hands, and all the things that I say on television. And they took her up. At that point, I was escorted up to the visiting area of the operating floor, the third floor. Did you remember talking to the police officers or detectives that night? There were some Emory uniformed people there. And I know they wanted to talk to Danny Joe, but I was obviously just dry. Maybe they do. Understandable situation. You remember what time, how long you guys were in the hospital for? And she was on the table about an hour and a half. And if you ever want to have to be absolute critical, if you want to have the worst feeling in your life, is to be sitting in one of those waiting rooms, 2 surgeons in scrubs and a chaplain come around the corner and start walking towards me. I stood up behind me, holding somebody else. Yeah. Anyway, they took me into the room, explained this to me, and asked if I wanted the chaplain. Did I want to see her? Right. All of that. she's I think you mentioned that the future over the there, whatever thing. Middle staff, or just a copy coming down a little bit. The motion attached to this person, but yeah, I was not really well. Okay, so I went to ask for some help, and the chaplain said I had to go through the give us the time. A little bit, I'll take care of it. No, you don't have to. I'll take care of all that. I did that. You'll take care of that. Anyway, I went down the ER. I'd been a patient in there before, so they had records and insurance and that. Got a physical. Anyway, they processed me, and the ER, you go about 4 different places. I finally see a doctor, and he described some traumatic man. I don't know what that is. Never had it before. And it was 1 milligram, and I took that. It seemed as if the edge of it. But I was at the point. I didn't leave the hospital until 8 o'clock. I just couldn't myself. Did you get over there home, or I stayed home? Actually, it was after 6:45. And what happened was Danny Joe had called her husband, Tom Carter, and Tom Carter came to the hospital, and Tom Carter gave Danny Joe and Tex a ride home. And I just didn't want to leave. She was there. I understand. Do you take any medication? This is background for you. Do you take any medications on a daily basis for anything specific? I'm supposed to take the Crestor for my cholesterol, and I'm spotty, but you have to remember it's maybe 3 times a week. Cardiologist prescribed it, and that's part of my cholesterol now. It runs high in my family. But nothing else. I got a 97-year-old mother who's a live wire.
Deputy Murphy, if you would please collect this from me. This is the portion of State's Exhibit 147 the jurors can have, and trade that for all the copies of the transcript from the jurors. You have 147 now? Yes. Great. Okay, I'm going to ask you all to return to the jury room. We'll get with you soon as to when we can get you into the basement again with the vehicle and the firearm. Again, we may be interrupting a mid-discussion, but you'll need to be flexible with us on this one thing. Okay? Thank you.
All rise for the jury.
Well, I can say this time, you may talk about the case when you go to the break. Please.
Please be seated.
Ms. Griffin, were you the representative from the state that was down looking at the vehicle? So a couple questions. How cold is it?
It's not cold.
Good. Number 2, is it set up in a way that is satisfactory for the state?
Yes, it is.
Okay. Mr. Harvey, were you able to view the vehicle? Okay. And is it set up in a position that's satisfactory to the defense?
Is that a broad question? Because if it's a broad question, no. If it's a specific question,
Given my rulings.
given your ruling, yes.
Okay. And what are we doing? Because I don't intend to go down there. Is the dowel in or not in?
If the dowel is in.
Okay. All right. How are we doing with your personnel and getting folks down there?
We do have another deputy
I
here.
saw him come in. Great. Are we able to conduct business in here, not related to this case, while your team is getting the jurors down into the basement?
Yes.
Great. Okay, then my proposal is that Deputy Murphy or his colleague go in and collect the jurors now before they get too settled and get them, well, I guess, are there any instructions you would like me to give the jurors before they go down there?
I think it's the same instruction you gave last time about not moving the seats and stuff like that.
Okay. Mr. Harvey, any instructions you'd like me to give the jurors?
Well,
Narrow question.
I do. I don't know whether it's appropriate. You know, there are so many differences at this particular point in terms of lighting, no bottle of wine, the gun is not inside a plastic bag. All the things that I articulated to you before could be encapsulated in an instruction saying something like, you know, we're allowing you to do this as a view, but you understand you're going to have to take it in. Yes.
Keep in mind the differences between what you're doing.
Yes.
I think that's fair. It's certainly not introducing evidence. I don't think it's commenting on the evidence.
I don't think it is either, but I think you need to tell it it is got to be taken in context with everything else.
Sure. Okay. Any objection, Mr. Rucker, to an instruction along those lines? No, sir. Okay, let's bring the jurors back up.
They went to break.
They went to break. Don't worry, they're not coming back in.
Can I add an objection if it wasn't already clear? I didn't understand, you have decided to let them go without anybody being present?
Correct.
What about deputies?
Well, I think there needs to be a deputy at a distance
To object to that.
Well, I think
The law is absolutely clear, there should be nobody in the deliberation room, wherever that deliberation room is, even if it becomes the basement of the courthouse. There should be nobody there. It's not just hearing distance. They shouldn't be there.
Well, let me finish. You're doing a good job of interrupting. How do we know when they're done? They can't just wander around in there.
I'm sorry that's problematic.
Okay.
But they're not allowed to have anybody in the deliberation room. Not watching them, not, turning their back and pretending they're not listening or not in fact listening. It's just not permitted. Okay. To have anybody in the deliberation room while the deliberation is in progress. I mean, the laws, you decide cases for that. It's just absolutely permitted. Above interruption.
The objection wasn't an interruption. It was, but we're good. So, can Captain Gates come up here, or can you communicate with him? It's probably best if we speak directly. Okay. So if you could come on up here, especially since they're on break, we've got a minute.
Sounds good.
So let's do this. My vote is we do the bond hearing on Mr. Scott while they're having their break. We'll do that bond hearing. When that bond hearing is over, if we could have Captain Gates up here by then, I can talk to him about the parameters of how we would do this to see if that works for him, because he'll need to be okay with it. And then we can, if we can sort that out, jurors can go down there, and I can turn to the motion for summary judgment.
Sounds good.
So we need to get Mr. Scott out here, and you guys need to step back from the tables.
Detention.
Sure. And closing that gate wouldn't change that calculation for you?
That's another side story. I'd rather.
Okay, we don't need to get into that right now. That's not how we'll work it sounds like. Okay. Well, I understand your concern. I just need the bottom line. If the answer is, if there's going to be a gun down there, there's going to be a deputy down there, then, excuse me, I just have to structure it differently. They won't be able to deliberate. They will have to, if they want to be in the vehicle, it'll be just like last time, and the defendant has the right to be there, and we'll just repeat what we did a few days ago, with the difference being they'll have the unloaded firearm with them.
Okay, one more question. While they are down there,
do they have to talk?
So, they may not if we are doing it like we did the other day. I'll give them the same instruction that, look, you can do whatever you want. If you want to get in the vehicle, you can. You don't have to. You want to close the door, you want to get in there with a gun, you can. You don't have to. There's no requirement, but they're given the opportunity. And that would be similar to what we did before. What I had envisioned, not fully appreciating, which I do now, the concern you've raised was, it's whatever they're doing back there, they can do down there. They can talk amongst themselves, and if juror X said, well, look, if you sit like this, now hey, let's try it. They could talk, because that's what they do when they deliberate. And that's the ideal, is that they would be able to interact with these pieces of evidence and have whatever discussion naturally flows from that. But this is a complicated situation, and so I've made my request. I respect your answer, whichever way it is. I fully understand your set of concerns and what you think is prudent and what's not prudent. It just will be a different scenario. If the answer is with gun, there'll be supervision, then we have it like we did before. If it's, you know what, if I just have folks posted up here, I'll know we're containing the scene, but they can't watch or hear what's going on, then we could do it the way I had envisioned. But I just need to know what you're going to authorize, and then I'll tell the jurors how it's going to be.
Judge, I will not feel comfortable with a gun outside of detention. And even if deputies were present, I'm not watching. Well, what's the use?
Okay.
I feel I've failed as a security supervisor.
Okay. I fully understand that, and I'm going to get some stuff on the record with the attorneys and whatnot, and I'll let the jurors know how it's going to work. I'm not going to say, oh, it could have been this. I'm just going to say very matter-of-factly, we're going to do what we did before. The one difference is you have the firearm with you if you want to hold the firearm while you're in the vehicle. And we'll have, the setup will really be just like what you saw before, except it'll be warmer.
Yes, sir, of course.
Okay?
Okay.
All right. Thanks.
No problem.
Sorry about that. Back to you, Mr. Haynes.
I appreciate it, Your Honor. No worries. One,
I want to put a little time constraint on you, because obviously the defense will talk about this a little before, at 1:30. Okay? 1 hour lunch. They want lunch. I don't see anyone from the defense. If you let the defense know, they don't need to come out, but the jury wants an hour. And they have a question about adjusting the back seat. Let's get someone from the defense out here. The jurors want to go to lunch now. They're going to have lunch. They want an hour. They're going to have an hour. They have also asked a question, and we're not putting this on the record right now, about adjusting the back seat so it looks like it did in a bunch of the photos. The back seat is what Mr. Gardner said.
Can I?
We don't need to work through it now, because I got to go too. The jurors are going to go. I'm just sharing with you. We'll get it on the record when we reconvene at 1:30. Their question was, can the back seat be adjusted so it looks like it does in, and they list 3 exhibits that show the back seat reclining. 99, 114, and 193. Food for thought over lunch. See you at 1:30.
What happened to working lunch?
You didn't like it? All I got was grief and dirty looks, and so I'm giving everyone an hour.
The jury wanted
What did they say?
working lunch. They wanted an hour. It was you that cut everybody down during the course of this, and my doctor has been emailing you every day, and you haven't responded.
Now, those are the things that went straight to my junkie.
Yeah, that's what I mean.
All right.
That's exactly.
Dr. Rye.
Yeah. Bruce isn't sleeping. Yeah. But I was.
Somebody's really against the houses, so
No, they're having their lunch break now. I don't know if they're going out or eating.
Yeah, they're going
out. They're going out. Things have changed. They did ask for something different, but things got most places take an hour off.